Hi all, my name is Sam and today I'll be talking about the Melbourne Biodiversity Footprint Project. So biodiversity and nature are rapidly declining. Currently 1 million species are facing extinction and extinction rates are up to 10,000 times higher than the natural background rate of extinction. For context, the last time extinction rates this high marked the end of the dinosaurs. Now, even if you're not particularly concerned about biodiversity or nature, consider this. Half of the world's GDP depends on nature. Nature decline is a serious issue. Thankfully, the issue of nature decline is getting increasing recognition, and some organisations and governments are starting to take action. Core to this is the recent launch of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and Science-Based Targets Network. These frameworks aim to help organisations better measure, disclose and act on the nature-related dependencies and impacts. We've also seen legislative shifts, particularly in the European Union, that aim to force certain organisations to disclose how they impact nature, and similar legislation is expected in Australia within 5 years. Focusing on educational institutions, some universities, including the University of Melbourne, have taken the pledge as a nature-positive university. This is a commitment to not only halt negative impacts on nature, but to begin to reverse and restore nature by 2030. But there is one fundamental issue facing all organisations with nature-positive ambitions. If you want to reverse your impacts on nature, you first need to know what your impacts on nature are. And this is where my project comes in. My project, in collaboration with the Melbourne Biodiversity Institute, has been to calculate how the University of Melbourne's operations and supply chain impact nature. So last year I completed this analysis, and this slide gives a high-level overview of the steps taken to complete it. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for too long because I'll be releasing a paper on the analysis shortly, but what I want you to take from this slide is we use some of the best methods to try and quantify how the University of Melbourne impacts biodiversity. This graph shows the 6 highest impact drivers that we found. At the top, we have student international flights, then the university's investments, then electricity consumption, then the purchase of photographic and scientific equipment, construction, and consulting services. Now, a core trend I want you to identify from this slide is the actual point of impact on biodiversity. The university has a very indirect influence. And this slide explains what I mean by that. So this graph is a bubble chart that aggregates the university's impacts into upstream, direct, and downstream impacts. Upstream impacts are associated with the goods and services the university procures. The purchase of scientific equipment from the previous slide is an example of an upstream impact, as the primary impacts are embedded in the mining and processing of raw materials, manufacturing, and the transportation in all of the stages. The direct impacts are just that, direct. An example is when the university burns natural gas to heat its buildings on campus. The downstream impacts are associated with the outputs of the university after they have left its direct control. An example is the environmental footprint of the university's investment portfolio. And as shown here, the bulk of the university's impacts are on the upstream and downstream, but particularly in the upstream. In the journey to become nature positive, this presents as a serious issue because upstream impacts are simply hard to measure. The modern globalised economy has very complicated supply chains with often numerous suppliers at different levels to produce a single product. This means trying to get data on both the magnitude and location of impact on biodiversity is very difficult, hence acting as a significant barrier to the implementation of effective nature-positive strategies. So to conclude with 3 points that can be generalised to other organisations from this analysis. 1, most current biodiversity impact methods and databases don't measure real biodiversity decline, and to act as if they do could have really bad conservation outcomes. Now, that doesn't mean these methods are useless. Some of the better impact methods and data sources that are already available might be useful as a first attempt analysis. With a nuanced interpretation of the results, these analyses might act as a quantitative materiality screening, so organisations can focus their initial nature-positive strategies on their most impactful activities. But finally, and my last point, twice, we need better assessment methods. We need methods that are able to measure both the magnitude and location of impacts on biodiversity. So this is my LinkedIn, and there's also the QR code to the Biodiversity Institute. We are continuing this research, and thank you.